He's a good guy to know, particularly if you want to build a company in this space. So that's what they're doing, spend time every day.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to talk to you today about something that's near and dear to my heart, which is something very different from what everyone else has been talking about. This is about what we call medical devices. Okay, so medical devices, you'll see, I'll give you some examples. But here's what we're going to talk about. What are the ingredients for a successful medical device? The need that, as Deborah Eston said, you got to have the healthcare people and the engineers and the technologists working side by side, because neither can do it alone. And this is an area where also collaborating with the clinicians is a big deal. I'm going to talk about three kind of interesting medical devices that I've worked on that to some extent are hacking the human body, the human nervous system. Two that actually operate on the brain to treat pain and cure epileptic seizures, and one that is monitoring the heart to get patients with heart attacks to the hospital faster. And we'll talk about a couple of ideas, because it asked me to talk about some of the devices that actually did not pan out for whatever reason. I'll give a couple of examples. One of them is sort of my favorite invention. Unfortunately, there are reasons it didn't. And finally, what about the chocolate part? So medical devices include everything from MRIs and X-ray machines, electric EEG and electrocardiographic workstations, needles, catheters, stents, pacemakers and implantable defibrillators, knee joints and hip joints, even stitches. You know, cut yourself. How many here have had stitches at some point in your life? Yeah, those are medical devices. So, in order to be successful, and this also follows a lot on what Deborah said, that there are a number of things that over the years we've learned. It's got to be true to make an idea in this area successful. Number one, it's got to be good for the patient. It has to do something that's needed. Second, it has to be applicable to a large and growing population. As you'll see some of the timelines on this, these are not something you throw together, make a website, and then someone's going to buy your company for $1 billion. These are projects that take tens of years often. They're faster than drugs, but it still requires a lot of staying power and a lot of capital. So there better be a big paycheck at the end. And on the other hand, if you can create something that really revolutionizes an important part of medicine, it is a ticket to essentially, write your own check, because the returns are huge. It has to make more money for the prescribing physician. Now, you may say I'm being skeptical here, but my dad in 1969 invented the world's first rechargeable pacemaker. An amazing accomplishment, because at that time the pacemakers had to be re-implanted every 14 months. They now last about 7 years. So I had to do a surgery every year, a little over a year. These rechargeables would last 20 to 30 years, and they were a total failure. The doctors were making all their money from the re-implantation of the pacemakers. And they so bad-mouthed it that it never got off the ground. Now, it might be more successful today, but now with 7-year batteries, it's probably better to actually replace the technology anyway, because they advance so much. You want the technique and how it's used to be well known. If it's very complicated and very hard, it will fail. My favorite example is something called Hartport. They wanted to do bypass surgery through sort of small openings rather than do a full chest spread. And the training was so crazy that nobody could ever really become proficient at it, and it just died of its own weight. And today, it's becoming important that it be cost effective. That not only it treats something that is helping the patient, but that it's not dragging down the healthcare system. So, I don't know how many here have seen any of the Star Trek movies. I'm a little more of a child of the 70s. But Leonard McCoy was the famous doctor on the boat on the Star Trek series. And when they did the first movie, and he's going into his new sick bay, this is what he said.
And they probably redesigned the whole sick bay, too. I know engineers, they love to change things.
So doctors and engineers have a different way of looking at the world. The MD training pushes for best current practices, not invention. They invent something new to do something in a new and different way. They usually call it malpractice. Engineers and scientists don't live day to day with what's going on in the human body. Doctors do. One of my favorite quotes is that when a surgeon takes some tool he's using in a surgery and throws it against the wall in disgust because it's not working, that's the opportunity for the biomedical engineer. The team I work with include my dad, who is a mechanical engineer and a physicist. My brother Tim, a Cornell Cornell med graduate, and he's an interventional cardiologist. They put stents and they open the coronary arteries. And a very preeminent neurologist, Dr. Adrian Upton, who's a professor and runs the neurology operation at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, near Toronto. So, unfortunately, some of these guys you've heard are serial entrepreneurs. They do one, then they do another. Unfortunately, with medical devices, it takes so long that we never seem to get rid of the ones we started while we're still working on the new ones. So I have the unfortunate category of being a parallel entrepreneur, which is a lot more work than you would imagine, because I'm the chairman of the board of one of these, I'm CEO of another, I'm still doing inventions for a third, and it just takes a lot of effort. So these are the companies that are currently active. From epilepsy, migraines, and heart attacks, those we'll talk about today. But there's a stent company that does magnetic markers for breast lumpectomy, and a new one that my brother Tim is running to kill the sympathetic nerves outside the renal artery by injecting a little bit of alcohol through the catheter, and it will drop your blood pressure 30 points with no side effects and no drugs. It totally cures it, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, what's the advantage of spinning these off as independent startups versus keeping them all under the same corporate umbrella?
Well, the problem would be focus, okay? And you never know which are going to succeed or which are going to fail. You don't want to drag one down with the other. It's hard enough to get one of these things going. And as you guys probably know, one of the advantages of startups is everyone's got stock options. And they're all focused on the vision of that company. And the other reason we can do it this way is we have a process that says when we start something in one field, we write a agreement on our patents that say anything in that field is owned by this company, but anything that's not in that field is still ours, which allows us to move forward and do a different startup. And patents are very important here. And I think I talked about that. So let's start with epilepsy. 10% of all people will have a seizure in their lifetime. 1% of the world population has epilepsy. Often it's pretty benign. The most benign is what they call an absence seizure, where you just kind of blank out for a second and then come back. If you're driving, that's not a good thing. There are 2.3 million Americans with epilepsy and almost 700,000 whose seizures are so bad that the drugs don't work. And by the way, these drugs are nasty mothers. I mean, in order to stop the epileptic seizure, which, by the way, is sort of like a electrical resonance in a portion of your brain, they have to basically disconnect some of your neurotransmitters, which of course screws up your brain and how it works, which is not a good thing, especially for children. It's even worse. One way to fix it for sure is to take that part of the brain out that is causing the problem. Of course, that means you have to have part of your brain taken out, which is not recommended. And the cost is huge. And these people are unbelievably debilitated and have huge stigma. So people like the story of how do these things get started. And so this one, my dad and I were on a plane to Toronto. We were going to have dinner with Dr. Adrian Upton, with whom he had worked on a epilepsy trial using stimulation of the cerebellum in the back of the brain. This occurred in the early 1980s. I asked him, why didn't it work? He said, well, we were continuously stimulating, maybe the cerebellum's not the right place. I said, well, why don't you put the electrodes where the seizure starts in the brain and build a defibrillator that shocks it to stop it? Well, that's a really good idea. Let's talk to Dr. Upton about that tonight. So at dinner, we had our food. My dad said, David had an interesting idea on the plane today. And I explained it to Dr. Upton, and he went, I've been trying to get somebody to do this for 20 years. There is a long history in epilepsy that a response to the portion of the brain that the seizure starts in, which is the neurons get too excited and they start sending signals back and forth, that if you can do that, you can disrupt the seizure. They learned this 2,000 years ago at the time of the Greeks, where people would get banged, because people were right-handed, they get banged on the left side of their head with a sword. They'd create seizures, and that would mean that their right hand, because left and right go together, would have seizures. They found that if you grab your wrist and send a signal back to that part of the brain, it can stop the seizure. So this idea of responsive stimulation got started. We filed a patent. We went back to Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield, and Byers, that many of you may know about if you know about startups, who had done our first stent startup. And they funded it. And today, NeuroPace has about 100 people. And they have what's called the responsive neurostimulator. You see it there, with their own electrodes that are put at the site, either deep in the brain or onto the surface. Every patient is different. So part of the key here from a signal processing analysis is every patient is different, but their seizures are pretty much always the same. They start in one spot, at least those that can be treated with this, and they evolve the same way electrically so you can detect them. And I did a lot of the early detection work on how you ensure you only see the seizures and don't stimulate when it's not. But at the low level we stimulate, if you stimulate and it's not a seizure, it doesn't really do any harm because you're using such a low voltage. But if it is a seizure, it will disrupt it. And so the FDA approved this November 13. We're now more than 50 US centers putting this in, and Cornell was in the study that did it. And so the next video, is, so this is what it looks like. It's embedded in the cranium. They remove a piece of your skull, put it in, and attach the electrodes, and it's all hidden under your hair, which is nice. Nobody knows you have this thing working. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play. Hopefully this will work. Escape.
At 29 sites across the country, another experimental treatment is underway, using impulsive electricity in the brain to stop a seizure in its tracks. 26-year-old Monica Lovelace is part of a clinical trial going on at California Pacific Medical Center in San Francisco.
Ready to go?
Monica was diagnosed with epilepsy when she was 5 years old after contracting meningitis. She and her husband, Ben, have 2 young children, but her seizures make it hard for her to take care of them. Why did you decide to get this experimental procedure?
Absolutely, for my kids, absolutely. I wanted to be able to walk my kids to school. If I'm walking them to school and I have a seizure, are they going to walk into the street?
She's getting a device implanted in her brain that will detect the beginning of a seizure and give her a pulse of electrical stimulation to make it stop, like a pacemaker. Dr. Peter Weber, a neurosurgeon, uses a computer to calculate the safest route to implant electrodes in her brain.
The wires come from the back forward, deep inside the brain, and that's the way they look from front on view.
Implanted in the skull, the NeuroPace device is smaller than a cell phone. When it's turned on, it immediately detects Monica's abnormal brain activity.
These are abnormal discharges that lead to seizure.
We followed up with Monica 3 months after the device was implanted. Now that you have this device in your brain, what happens when you feel a seizure is coming on? Can you explain it?
It doesn't come on. It doesn't come on.
Monica still gets the familiar sensation that she's about to have a seizure, but now it usually stops. She showed us how she wirelessly downloads her brain waves.
This goes over the area where the device is.
The information is sent by computer to her doctor, who then fine-tunes the stimulation. While the device is still in the early stages, a preliminary study showed it helped 50% of people with seizures in the same region of the brain as Monica's.
It's kind of neat because me and my husband were talking about all the different possibilities of what it can do now. Like, maybe getting a job.
So it can make a big difference, and part of the telecom part of it is the big database that NeuroPace has of all of the what are called ECOGs, the electrical signals from this patient's brain, and over time have learned for what type of signals, what is the best detection and what's the best stimulation pattern, and also based on what part of the brain needs to be stimulated. It's still at an early stage, but it's now moving out into the general public, so that's very exciting. The first patent was filed in 1997. I'll show you how long it takes. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about migraine headaches. Anyone here get migraine headaches? No. There are a lot more people with migraine headaches than with epilepsy. And it's hugely prevalent during productive years, and more in women than in men due to the menstrual cycles. The cost burden is huge. People, when they get it, often lose a day or sometimes 2 or 3 from work. Some people have such bad migraines that they can't work at all. And unfortunately, the medications have bad side effects. They also knock you out. So if you take the medication, you can't work. And what they've learned over the last few years is that the triptans, the medications that are most widely prescribed, the more you take them, the more headaches you get. Well, medication overuse headaches. So it's a vicious cycle. Nothing to break it. And then there are all the people who can't take those medications. These include pregnant women. These include anyone on cardiovascular or neurology meds, things like depression. So the idea of the device was migraines, we believe. And the story here is Dr. Upton, my dad and I were together at a retreat to try and think about what could we do to combine technology and medicine to do something for a neurological disorder. And we still can't remember whose idea it was to use transcranial magnetic stimulation that's been used to study the brain for 40 years. You put a coil over a portion of the brain, the head. You deliver a very intense pulse in 1/10 of a millisecond, as intense as an MRI machine, but it's such a short time that it doesn't take a huge device the size of an MRI machine to do it. And what it does is that magnetic pulse down in your brain, which is a conducting media with saline, with salt water, will cause currents to flow. So you're basically electrically stimulating a portion of the brain without having to put wires in it. And as a result, you put it over the motor cortex here, you'll alarm. You put it over a place, you'll smell something. And they've used it to map the brain over many, many years, and it's harmless. It cannot hurt you using a single pulse. You put lots of pulses in and do it too often, it can cause epileptic seizures. But the idea here was just do 1 pulse at a time, which has been basically proved to be completely harmless. So the device itself, when you feel a headache coming on, you press a button, it charges the capacitors. This is like a defibrillator or a photo flash. And then you put it behind your head, you press the button, and you hear a click, a little twitch in your scalp, but it's not painful. and it's delivered the pulse. And then what we're recommending now is somewhere between 2 and 4 pulses. And in fact, we are expanding into a fairly large trial in the United States after its FDA approval, which was a year ago, June, to have them use 4 pulses in the morning, 4 in the evening, and 3 when the headache begins, and then every 15 minutes until it goes away. How well does it work? Using just 2 pulses in our US study, what we saw is that with just 2 pulses, 35% of the patients had no pain at all at 2 hours, compared to only 7.4% of those who had a device that clicked and buzzed, but actually didn't deliver a pulse. So they didn't know, it was placebo, it was a fake. And because even the fakes work. And it turned out if the patient didn't have a headache when they started using it, the fakes worked a lot better because sometimes they actually weren't getting a migraine. But if they were actually at moderate or severe pain, there was a huge difference because this thing really works. And these are the similar triptan results. And by the way, they all have serious side effects. This one has none. And in England now, we've been doing this commercially now for 2 years, and what we've discovered is the more you use it, the better it works. And the patient acceptance increases over time. Same thing with the brain pacemaker for epilepsy. It gets better over time. This is just the opposite of what happens with drugs. Drugs, the more you take them, the less effective they become, and they have to find another drug for you. So it turns out that treating the body and neurological disorders with electricity is the winning thing here. I talked about that. All right, so let me play. During the study, we had I actually don't think I have this one here. So we'll just keep going. So the last thing I'm going to talk about and spend more time on is heart attacks. Heart attack is the #1 killer in the United States. And what's more is having a heart attack and not dying is sometimes worse than dying, because each time you have a heart attack, which is a blood clot forming in your coronary arteries that closes off the flow to a portion of your heart muscle, that portion of your heart can die from no oxygen. And when it dies, your pump doesn't work as well. And pump failure sometimes is referred to as congestive heart failure, which is the most expensive thing to the healthcare system in the United States. It turns out people need to, in order to go to the hospital to get treated for a heart attack, first you have to have symptoms. 50% of people do not have the normal symptom of chest pain or pressure. That is the normal warning. Second, you have to recognize those symptoms. And the third thing is you have to take action after you recognize those symptoms. And one of our doctors has a famous quote. He says, "Denial is not just a river in Africa." That particularly men are really bad at this. And it turns out married men get to the hospital faster than married women because the wife is the one who calls 911. And one of the patients in our study, his wife told me that he had taken 20 Tums, because indigestion is one of the symptoms. And then she finally said to him, she said, "Honey, either you're going to the hospital now or I am." So it works that way. In addition to which, you survive a heart attack, you're scared shitless. Okay, there's a 20% post-traumatic stress syndrome rate in people who survive a heart attack. This is very serious, and that level of anxiety is not good for your health. In addition to affecting your life and willingness to go live it, which is what we just all do.
What is it?
Jack Nicholson's having a heart attack.
What is it?
I'm okay, I'm fine. Yeah. Okay, so, and that is the recognition of what's going on. So, why is it important to address this problem? Not really. Okay, so this is the chart of mortality versus time to get treated for a heart attack. Where we are now is if you're lucky and you have symptoms and you recognize them, the median time to get people in is about 3 hours. So it's somewhere out here, okay? So in an hour to an hour and a half, you're right over here. Now that we've gotten the time from arrival at a hospital to treatment down to an hour and a half. It used to be further out. So they moved back here, but it still hasn't affected mortality. We need to get up to here. What does that mean? That means I got to get you into the hospital in under an hour, so that in an hour to an hour and a half, you're up here. And that's exactly what we've done. These are American Heart Association statistics. And low EF is ejection fraction, is that portion of the blood that is ejected out of the ventricles in your heart when it contracts. Low EF is the sign of heart failure. So how big is this? There are about 1.2 million heart attacks a year in the United States. There are close to 1 million survivors. And of those, if we take only the highest risk group who don't need a pacemaker or an ICD, which is like 10%, you have 200,000 or 300,000 patients a year who could benefit from something that would, having survived the first heart attack, that would help prevent the second one from being as bad. And the second heart attack, by the way, has double the risk for heart failure and for dying. So you don't want the first one, but man, you really don't want the second one. Just to give you a scale of how much money could be available to this, 200,000 patients for a $10,000 device, you can do the multiple, that's $2 billion. Just a year for that, not including outside the US, not including the other 600,000. So what's a heart attack look like? Do this again. All right, so a heart attack is a fatty layer of lipids under a thin layer of plaque in a fairly open coronary artery. The plaque ruptures, the fat sees the blood, and a blood clot forms. When that forms, the signal that you see in the heart, and you sometimes see it in a 12-lead EKG, whoops, how'd that happen? It's a touch screen. Let me go back here because I just showed it up here. Okay, is this part of the heart signal? Okay, this is the Q. This is the R wave. That's the T wave. This is the S, and this is called the ST segment. It's what they look at. If you come to the emergency room with a heart attack, it's what they look at when you do a stress test to see if you have partial blockage in your coronaries. It is the portion of the heartbeat where the muscle is rejiggering itself up to be strong enough to re-energize itself to contract again. That means it moves positively charged sodium ions into the muscle. And here's what happens electrically. This is a layman's physicist's view of a heart attack. If you're healthy and you exercise, all of your heart muscle becomes somewhat oxygen deprived, and the whole thing speeds up. The pulses from the pacemaker in your left atrium will speed up to make your heart rate go higher. But the muscle itself goes through its cycle faster as well. Now, if you're having a heart attack, you have 3 major coronary arteries. The blockage is in only one. So a third of your heart thinks you're exercising, 2/3 doesn't. So that third is becoming very positively charged ahead of all the rest. And that's the signal that you can see. And the sweet spot to see it is at the apex of the right ventricle, where all the layers of heart muscle come together. That's why you put pacemaker leads there. Because if you give a little shock there, the whole ventricular system will contract together. But that's also the spot where you can see this change from anywhere within the heart. Okay, so what did we do? After doing some early research to see if this concept would work, that from measuring this ST segment from inside the heart, you could actually detect heart attacks easily and reliably, we actually went and developed an implantable device that's put in like a pacemaker. It's an operation that takes 15 to 20 minutes under a local anesthetic. There are millions of them put in every year. There are tens of thousands of doctors who already know how to do it, just like a pacemaker. But this doesn't pace. This is a 24/7 monitor for your heart that is going to tell you if you're having trouble. And it does it by having a vibrator like in your cell phone that is in the implant, and a pager that will beep at you and flash a light, multimedia, so that it'll wake you up if you're asleep. But even if you lost that pager, you can never lose the implant, so it's always there to warn you. And you'll see an example in a little video clip that we'll see later. Let's keep going. And there are two levels of alarms. There is what we call an emergency alarm for a heart attack, which is the international standard. You heard a lot about alarms this morning. Beep, 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 beep. If you're ever in a hospital, you'll hear that. And I agree, I've been a patient, and there are too many alarms like that that really aren't emergencies. But that is the international standard, and that's what we use for an emergency. The go see your doctor for anything else is one beep or buzz every 7 seconds. So, how do you prove this works to the FDA? They were very worried that patients would ignore symptoms, patients would ignore the alarms, that it would cause lots of unneeded procedures, all of which turned out to not be true. But as a result, we had to do a 1,000-patient study. That's how many it takes to get over the randomized 6-month period, 50 heart attacks, to show that having this alarm will make a difference compared to not having it. So every patient got the device, and 7 days after they got it, they were randomized. They were either in the treatment group, who got their pager, got all the alarms turned on, and went home with the instruction that if this thing goes off, call 911 and go to the hospital as fast as you can. Or if the see your doctor alert, pick up the phone, call your doctor, and make an appointment for the next day or two. The control group, we programmed to detect the heart attacks, but we're not going to tell you. And the patients knew which they were in. And they were not happy being in the control group, but it was only for 6 months. At the end, the control group got their alarms turned on and they got their pager. So the hope was we could get enough heart attacks in that first 6 months to show that the difference that telling someone to go to the hospital makes. Not only a difference historically from that 3-hour median of symptoms, but can we also help patients who don't have symptoms or don't recognize symptoms? And can we also get it not 3 hours, but try and get it under an hour? So let me give you an example of one of these events. This is a woman in Michigan. In one of our early studies, you can see the change in the ST segment that set the alarm off at 6:30 in the morning. She had some symptoms at the time. By 7 a.m., she's in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, but there's not seen a lot. These things do tend to, open and close. So it's a very tricky thing. But if you're having one of these things, you need to get to the hospital. Let the professionals figure it out. And that's all we're trying to do here. We're not trying to tell them what it is. We're trying to get the patient to standard of care, where the standard chest pain protocol, they will run a sequence of things, and if it's the real deal, they will get quick treatment. But they'll start it under an hour as opposed to starting it at 3 hours or not starting it, I should say. This is the signal in the emergency room. There is the huge change indicating a totally closed coronary artery. This is 50 minutes after the artery closed. So she was in probably in 40 minutes, 45. They then rushed her into the cath lab, And what you see here, you see how there's a place where there's blank, where the black does not go across. That's blood flow, the black. That means there's a total blockage. There's just a tiny line. That is the blood clot that has closed this woman's coronary. They put a stent in, and that's what stents do. Totally opened up, no harm, no foul. She's treated in an hour and a half, and no damage to her heart. That's the goal of what we do. So, the device was designed to get people with occluded arteries to the hospital faster, tell patients whether they have symptoms or not, tell doctors about other things. You'd be surprised how much you can see if you're monitoring the heart 24/7, and I'll give you a list later. And hope to improve the quality of life and this anxiety problem in these heart attack survivors. So, this is the money shot. All right. The green are the patients in the treatment group for their heart attacks. Okay. 29 out of 34 got in under 2 hours, which was our goal. Only 4 patients with 5 events came in after 2 hours. The latest one was 27 hours, a woman who couldn't find anyone to take care of her young children. The red is the control group. Chest pain doesn't work. 1 out of 18 actually got there in under 2 hours from when we knew that person's artery had closed. The median time was 22 days. Most of those were patients who didn't know they had a heart attack. Now, we loaded the deck. We had 57% of the patients had a high chance for no symptoms or atypical symptoms. So we loaded it. But even at that, it surprised us how bad chest pain is to get these patients in. And these are the ones that had events when they got there. The doctor ran the test and said, you know, sir, you have a heart attack. He says, I have? I didn't know that. And a lot of heart attacks are like that. So, I think I talked about that. But we found other things. For instance, monitoring your heart rate. All these patients are on what are called beta blockers. They keep their heart rate from getting too high because they have cardiac disease and it's bad for them. And it turns out that if you monitor their heart rate and they don't like taking beta blockers, it doesn't make you feel great. And if they stop taking them or the dose is wrong, their heart rate gets way up. And the device will tell them to go see their doctor. Doctor will yell at them, get back on your beta blockers or change the dose. And we had 61% more changes to the doses of beta blockers in the treatment group than the control group. And then when the control group got their alerts, for the next 6 months, it went the other way because the treatment group already were controlled and they already were behaving, taking their meds, whereas the other ones weren't. So here's an interesting technique that can actually help in getting patients to take their medicines correctly. Here are some of the other things we found over the 1,800 patient years of data. Interesting things are anemia. If you're anemic, that means you've had a GI bleed and your hemoglobin is low, but you have some coronary disease, you will see that as less oxygen in your heart, our device will detect it. We found cases of sleep apnea. You stop breathing, the same sort of thing can happen. Plus all sorts of arrhythmias that were very helpful to these patients. Okay, so let's hear what the patients have to say.
Became apparent that it would be a part of a larger picture, which was something that would save lives through prevention, to give other people a chance, like I had a chance.
It's a comfort for me and my family, especially my wife, to know that there's something there that's tracking that all the time for you.
but with the device, I feel more comfort. I gain peace of mind. This is my angel.
Dr. Hiroki offered this opportunity for this device that literally we both felt like the heavens had opened up and the blessings were pouring out because we never suspected a heart attack.
I rest better. When I go to bed at night, I don't worry about it. I don't worry about it during the day because I feel like that the sticker that I wear will caution me and let me know when something's going wrong. I thank God every day for the blessing He's given my family, my mom and I, and
Well, see, your mom got
one day.
bad
It is
family
peace
history.
of mind.
Something that I think is gonna get peace of mind, because I didn't realize how many people have a second heart attack after a first heart attack. I feel more relaxed, and I don't worry about having another heart attack, worry what this pain is, worry what that pain is, because when I have this in, it's just gonna warm me more.
So every time I try to do anything, I have a heart attack. And it's kind of a scary thing because you really, you just feel fine the next minute you're gone. I think it helps to kind of take some of the anxiety out of everything that's going on. It gives you a little peace of mind. Maybe I can get some help quick enough instead of worrying about it all the time.
Now I know that there's how can I put it, a certain, in an uncertain world, that something I can count on is within my reach. It's in me, it's here, and I can count on it to now when I'm overdoing it, when there's something about to happen, if it happens, and that's very reassuring.
I see a difference. He goes out with his friends, and I thought, why he wasn't going out the house? Come home from work, stay in the house. Go to church, stay in the house. Now I call him, are you home? No.
It gives me a peace of mind to know that I have a backup system.
All right, it just keeps going. Okay. So everyone kept telling us this thing gave them such amazing peace of mind. So we decided, as they often do in medical studies, to actually do some official quality of life studies among our patients, and the results were off the chart. Both of the what they call validated studies that have been given again and again and again showed statistically significant improvements. And then one of the developers of that helped us make a special questionnaire. And the things that didn't surprise us, but really showed how effective this is, were that 90% of the patients basically said they would feel safer with less anxiety. And even a 69% improvement in quality of life. This is your overall quality of life. Your wife could die, or your kid could get hit by a truck, and your quality of life is going to go down. But overall, that's still an amazing report. So, where does this go in the future? I have to tell you, I was at Verizon headquarters in Basking Ridge, New Jersey, a couple of days ago to talk about collaborating on what's next. What's next? Is everyone here familiar with the OnStar? It's GM cars, and when your airbags deploy, somebody calls you and then takes care of you, make sure the ambulance is on the way. Well, we always believe that ultimately, as part of this ability to improve the comfort of patients and get the treatment even faster, we would love to make an OnStar for your heart that would work as follows. So you're walking around with a device, the alarm would go off. It would send something to an app on your smartphone. And what we're talking to Verizon about is that there is an official FCC-approved medical band called MICS that our device uses. So the implant and the external device can communicate out to a distance of 6 to 10 feet. Most pacers in the past, they had to be right up next to it. So it gives you that added range that would allow you to work with somebody having a pager or a phone. And so we talked to them about either a dongle or ultimately, would there be an iPhone 7M designed to have this capability for all kinds of medical devices, pacemakers, ICDs, the cranial one, the migraine, all these things could communicate through this band, which the FCC has set aside specifically for medical communications, and then be able with apps on that smartphone to send the information on to a central diagnostic center, possibly through a network database where it grabs the patient's data, or it's possible the data could even be stored in the implant, because these days memory is so cheap that it may be that patients could carry around their entire medical history with them and send it off. Then it would show up on the screen of a professional, would see what was happening. We actually did a study. The patient said they don't want to be called. They want the opportunity to step out of the room they're in and press the button on the phone to call the diagnostic center. But of course, if they don't within a given period, they get called. So we determined that was the optimal way to play this based on what the patients told us. So that call would go through. They talk to the patient, they call the EMS, they're on their way to get the patient, take them to the hospital. In the meantime now, the data is all there, and they can call the cardiology practice the patient is part of. They can send them the data showing the ST change that this patient's having a heart attack. They can send it into the emergency room of the hospital, so it's there before the patient gets there. And ultimately, unless the doctor either call the ER to tell them whoever's on call for that, or the interventionist who's going to put the stent in for that patient is on their way, and then they're there to take care of the patient at the time they arrive. That cuts that basically hour to hour and a half, probably to half an hour to treatment. And once again, that pushes you higher up that mortality curve. In that time, there will be no damage to the heart. So this is a case where we are very close. The FDA has received all the pieces, and on March 16th accepted what's called a pre-market approval application from us to get this device approved. We finished our quality audit at Angel Med last week. Actually, it was this week. This week we finished it. We passed with flying colors. The next step is to hear back from the FDA on the medical, is it safe, is it effective, and did the benefits outweigh the risk? And then schedule a doctor panel meeting, probably in September. And then 2 to 3 months after that, get approval and move this forward for the American people. Okay, so I have one more shot. You know what? I think I'm going to skip that. I think I've gotten over it. So, what do these have in common? They have patient-specific algorithm for anomalous medical events. Even with migraines, the patients have a way they know what's coming on. Some have a smell, some have an aura, flashing lights in their eye. And the idea is that you can then use those to treat it, and it uses electricity to treat electrical anomalies, at least for the seizures and the migraines. And these are huge markets. These are not small, and humongous patient needs. And there aren't good treatments. As I said, you saw how bad chest pain is. There's less than 20% of those who show up at emergency room with chest pain are actually having a heart attack. Most of them are just having chest pain. And as I said, half of those who have a heart attack don't have chest pain. So it's neither sensitive nor specific. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things that didn't work, and then we can move to questions. So this is one of my very favorite inventions. We were with a doctor who is what's called an interventional radiologist. He treats everything but the coronaries. He puts stents and does balloons in the legs and the other arteries of the body. And he says, you know, every time I access one of the arteries, the way I know I'm the artery is because I stick a needle into the femoral artery in the leg, and the blood starts squirting out. He says, I'm in the artery. He says, you know, with OSHA and hepatitis B and AIDS, this is not a good thing. Okay, couldn't you guys invent a way to actually know I'm in the artery and not have the blood spurt out? So literally, my dad was with me at the time. By the time we got back, we had 3 ways to do it. And the way that one was to build a special plastic needle. You can see this tube and then a bigger space. So those sizes are exactly designed so that when you're in an artery, the blood will fill right to the middle of this, and then it will go back and forth as your heart beats. So you know you're in the artery because the blood is moving back and forth. This thing at the end is called the hemostasis valve. It doesn't let blood out. It's semi-sealed, but you can push a guide wire through it. So the moment you're there, you throw the guide wire through, pull the needle out, done. No blood at all. Fabulous idea. We got Arrow International, a medical device company out called HealthX, to make it. And we were just so excited. It never took off, and here's the reason. It cost $6. The needle with the blood spurting cost 50 cents. And that was enough to be a barrier. Okay? Even back then, when costs were not as big a deal. So I'm always disappointed that that didn't work. Another project we worked on that was our first thing with Kleiner Perkins. In 1989, my dad and brother invented and a patent issued in 1991 to put a radioisotope, like a beta emitter, like phosphorus-32, which is fairly harmless, onto or into the metal of a stent. Because, as you know, radiation can prevent the division of cells. And when you put stents in, the biggest problem was that the scars would form, the cells would divide and grow into the arteries. We thought radiation would work to do this. And in fact, we ultimately proved it would, but none of the medical devices would do it. And KP we formed ISIS, and we got great results in animals, especially rabbits. It didn't seem to work well in pigs, which is normally the model. That should have been a clue to us that it was going to be tough. J&J invested $30 million. They were the first stent manufacturer to get this working. And so there's sometimes lemonade out of lemons. In 1998, J&J was working on a drug that would do this without all the additional issues associated with radiation. And that drug ultimately changed the landscape for all stents. And so they acquired, but they loved our stent designs. We pioneered how to make more flexible stents, and so they acquired that. We had issues with the ends of the stent not being radioactive enough and getting reclosure there, but the middles were clean. So we made stents with hot ends. We eventually got that to work, but by the time we got there, it was too late. And part of that too was we didn't have a really good R&D manager. The guy that became CEO was a great money raiser, but he was also a micromanager and kept us, with our experience in managing R&D, out of it, and therefore things went much slower than we think than they should have. But nonetheless, it came out okay. In 2001, it closed shop. Another example is we thought we could use the drug that J&J showed worked real well for stents to prevent adhesion. Big problem after surgery. And had real issues. We filed patents on it, got the issue. But we formed a company called Admedica. Finding the right biodegradable material was really difficult. We tried to work with a guy at Cornell who had the right material. For some reason or another, that didn't quite pan out the way it should, or we started with the wrong material. We also recognized that getting this approved was going to be extremely difficult because it's a drug-device combination, and those are always difficult. And then in 2005, a company stepped in who had a different drug-eluting wrap and wanted to keep this off the market. Made us an offer, and we exited. And I still think this would have worked.
You wanted to keep it off the market
because they thought they had a better solution, which they didn't. And they've pretty much gone under at this point. So I still think this will work. And to have and Dr. C.C. Chu in Ithaca, in HUMEC, actually has the only non-inflammatory biodegradable material. Our stent company is actually using it to the same drug called sirolimus. Okay, so quickly about the profit. There's a lot. Migraine, you can imagine how big that is. We're charging $250 a month to lease the device. And with the number of migraine headache users, it will be huge. And the Angel Med, I think, I talked about that. So that's it. It's a different area of medicine from the overall healthcare stuff, but it's a lot of fun because you can actually see the impact on the patients.
Thank you. Go back to the hack. Any questions?
Does the Angel Med monitor have to be implanted? Isn't there a way, I mean, we get ECGs with electrodes, external electrodes, so.
You can wear external electrodes for about 3 days. Okay, after that, it becomes very difficult. What's more, the amount of noise and artifact from that, there's no signal as clean as from a pacemaker lead screwed into the heart muscle. However, we have a next generation device that we're beginning the next step of studies with, that will have the device here and then a lead, a wire that's tunneled under the skin with one electrode at the sternum and one down below your left side, that we think with a much more complex signal processing, we can get close to the same results, less invasive, and we could access not just that 200,000 high-risk group, but the 600,000 or more, or maybe people who haven't even had a first heart attack, like Tim Russer, who are at high risk.
Right. Great.
A question about, I think it was Angel Med, the heart sensor. Have you or your family thought about some similar solution for people with diabetes? So a lot of continuous glucose monitors, they work with interstitial fluid, which isn't ideal. So I'm thinking about like monitoring actual insulin production in the pancreas.
People have been trying to do closed loop glucose. My dad invented the first implantable insulin pump back in the early 80s. And every few years, someone says, we got it, and they don't have it. The best they have is you keep taking your blood, you can calibrate it and sort of have it work. I actually had a meeting with Michael Caplet at Weill Cornell. We think we might have an idea, but I can't tell you. If I tell you, I have to tell you. Okay. So there may be some ways to use the body's own sensing with some of the things he's done on optical and gene expression that might be able to create something where a portion of the body could do what it already does, and you could use that to control insulin. Yeah.
I'm curious about the Angel Med clinical trial. How much did that cost overall for 1,800 patients from a physician-patient perspective, and also
$20,000 to $30,000 a patient.
Okay. And like, what's the risk profile of a medical device trial? Because if you look at like phase 3 pharmaceutical trials, that's a much riskier
Right.
proposition.
The drugs, I mean, that's nothing compared to a drug trial.
Okay.
Okay. And part of the reason devices are quicker is you usually have 2 stages. You don't have there never is a 3. See, for drugs, stage 1 is the toxicity study, but medical devices simply have biocompatibility testing. You make it out of biocompatible materials. You never do a phase 1. So then you do usually a safety feasibility study, which we did in, I think, 18 patients, just to show that we could put it in, that our programmer stuff was working, and then we went straight to the pivotal study. That cuts a significant amount of time out of it.
Other questions? All right, thank you, David, for your time.